Hello, so in this video I'm going to demonstrate the functionality of my script, the line animation toolkit, which as the name implies, it's a very flexible and robust toolkit for animating with, in this case, vector lines or vector line type drawings. I'm going to try to be super fast because the script is actually kind of complex in that it has a lot of functionality and a lot of flexibility. So I'm going to try to go through it very fast just to explain the basic functionality. So the idea behind the script is to create, let's say, SVG-like animations using sort of line drawings. Okay, so vector line drawings. So I have here an Illustrator document which has a sort of simplified drawing. This is the plan of a fort. So just to demonstrate the functionality of the script. So the basic workflow for working with the script would be to bring this Illustrator illustration here into the layers or any other vector object for that matter, and then convert it to convert the shapes from the vector layer. Okay, so the script works with shape layers. Okay, that's the first key thing about the script. Now let me just open up so we can see the shape layers in Illustrator are composed of groups, and each group is a I can go ahead and select different ones, so you can see each group is sort of an object on that Illustrator file that we can animate independently. So that's the key thing. We can actually do all of this by hand, especially using a trim effect, which we would have to add here from this menu, and that is the trim path effect in order to do a drawing-like effect of this vector drawing. But that would be very, very tedious to do by hand, layer by layer or group by group, and even more tedious would be if we wish to change it later. So this script is designed for complex drawings. So I'm going to pull it up from the window menu because the script is designed to be able to work just like a normal panel that we can actually dock to the interface, as you can see. But I'm going to work with it here on a window format so we can actually see all of the options. And when we are not seeing all of the options of the script, I couldn't implement scroll bars apparently, so I managed to do this 3 buttons. So we have a down button which scrolls down, we have an up button which scrolls up, of course, and if we lose track of where we are, I have also a home button, which is the first one, which returns to the default view. So I'm going to bring it back, I'm going to pull it back to that window format so we can actually see all of the options, and I'm going to sort of center this up. All right, so the script window really is divided in a couple different sections. So we have the target layer in which we are going to be working with. Then we have stroke properties, trim properties, and also animation properties, which is where all the magic happens actually. Okay, so first things first, we need to tell the script which layer we are going to be working with. So that is the target layer. And there's 2 ways to get this target layer into the script. We can select it here, and then I'm going to hit enter and copy the name, and I can simply paste in the name. And now we can hit enter to accept this as the layer that we are going to be working with. But check this out. If I misspell the name of this layer and hit enter, it's going to tell me, okay, select a shape layer. That's basically telling me, okay, this is not a valid layer and you need to reselect it. And it also, for any input that is not correct, it's going to give us a little asterisk. Okay, so it's very easy if something goes wrong. So let's say instead of inputting a value into an RGB color value, I actually input letters or negative numbers. If I click enter, you can see we get that asterisk. So I'm going to go back. So again, so that is very easy to actually identify potential errors in when we are trying to bake our animation and something doesn't work. Okay, so the second way of selecting a layer, and the most convenient and easy way, is to select the layer of the shape layer that we wish to work with, and then simply click on Set Selected. Now we have an additional option, which is if we want to get the layer color or not. So as you might have noticed before, we actually have a whole section dedicated to working with color. And by default, the color is this red color. So if I deactivate get color and set this as the target layer, nothing's going to change. But if I get the color and now select the same layer, you can see we get the layer color. Now, if we have multiple different colors in our object, it's going to go to the first group, or the first sort of object, and it's going to grab that first group's color. Okay, so that's how it is designed. All right, so the next section that we have is the stroke properties section. So this basically corresponds here. Each group has a stroke, and then once we select our target layer, is also automatically going to add the trim paths effect that we can also find right here. So that allows us to animate both the stroke and the trim. So you can see the properties for each one. So if I go to stroke, we have color, opacity, and stroke width, which are the same options that we have here. So the color, the opacity, the stroke width, and we can also choose the line cap and line join if we wish to change those. Now, these two guys are not animatable, but because there are a fairly important to the final look of our animation, I've also included them. So we have the option of changing them from the script as well. So we don't need to go group by group and change them manually. Okay, so the color itself has a lot of functionality packed to it, so I'm going to try to go as fast as possible to it. Now, the color is semi-independent of the rest of the properties that we can animate. And by the way, the trim properties here work the same as the stroke. So we have the start and an offset properties that we can animate. Now back to the color, we have two types of color. We have static color and animated color. So the static color, as the name implies, is not going to change during the animation, but it actually has a lot more functionality to it. So first of all, we can change the color, and you can see we have this color selector. It works on RGB, on the RGB color mode. So you can see as I change the sliders, two things change in real time: the little preview that we have here on the bottom, as well as the hexadecimal value that we can also paste from another application. So if I change the color and wish to go back to that layer default color, I can simply reselect the layer and get the color option, click, and we go back to that color. So very, very easy, very flexible, and yeah, very fast. So we also have animated color. So animated color works using the logic of the rest of the script. So the whole script works on works by animating a from and a to value. So you can see we have these little arrows that are very common, and to the left side of the arrow we have a value, as well as to the right. So the left value will be the from value, and the right one will be the to value. Okay, so this basically means, okay, we are animating in this case from 100 to 100, or like in this case, the end by default animates from 0 to 100. So very, very easy to understand this logic. So the same works with the color. So if we are on the animated color, we can input here an RGB value, and this just tells it, okay, so animate from red to red in this case. Now the interesting part is when we bake the animation, if the from and the to values are the same, no keyframes are going to be added. So the script is only going to have into account the properties here that are animated, that have different from and to values. Okay, so that allows us to keep a very clean timeline in terms of keyframes. Okay, so you'll notice on the animated sort of tab here, we have two buttons below the from and to color values. We can get the static color, which is this one. So In this case, I have grabbed the layer color. So if I want to use that to, if I want to animate that, I can very quickly get that color by clicking on Get Static, and that's going to go to the Static tab and grab the selected color there. And right now on the static color, we have that sort of yellow color, and we can also do the opposite. So we have the Set Static button. So if I click Set Static, it's going to set this as the static color. So a very nice way to go back and forth between the two and change the colors very, very quickly. So like I said, we can paste here an hexadecimal value, and that's going to update in real time. We also have a color picker, which is the default OS color picker. So I can go say to a green color here. I can click OK. It's going to set the green. Let's imagine I've actually inputted this hexadecimal value. Now I can't use hexadecimal here. So what would I do? I would simply get static, and there we go. Very, very fast. So the static actually allows us to do a lot more. So very quickly, I can set my, put my time, let's say in 1 second. And let's say I want to very quickly set a keyframe there to animate the color. So I can, let me just set the static color as this one. And now I can apply this color throughout the object without changing it. So I'm going to set this as the green. So if I click on Apply Color, it's going to apply the color without adding any keyframe. So it's simply going to change the object's color. But now let's imagine I want to simply animate this color. So I can activate the Set Keyframes option, Apply Color. That's going to mark keyframes where we were. I want to do, let's say, a 2-second animation. I want to animate to this yellow. So I'm going to set the static, Apply Color, and there we go. See? From green to yellow. Super easy, super fast, super flexible. Now let's say I don't like this color. I want to go back to a single color. I can uncheck Set Keyframes, Apply Color again, and there we go. Back to our original color. Very clean timeline, no keyframes. Very easy and very flexible. So like I said, we can also animate all of these other properties. So by default, the script is set to do a sort of drawing effect by animating the end end parameter of the trim properties here. So for each section of the stroke and the trim, we also have this apply from and apply to buttons. So this allows us to do more of a linear type of animation. So again, very easy, just like we did with the color. We set the marker here on the timeline where we want to set keyframes. Then let's say, okay, I want to animate this and manually. I can apply from, sets all of these values actually, because this animates all of this at the same time. I want to go to 5 seconds, apply the 2, and there we go. Very fast, very easy, very straightforward. So, but like I said, this actually sets keyframes for all of these 3 properties, and the same happens here with the stroke properties section. So I can go back using Control Z, and there we go. Now the real cool thing about the script is that we can do better animations. So by using here the animation property. So what we've been doing so far is very linear, if you will, very sort of boring. But yeah, so we have this animation properties, which is where all of the magic happens. So let's go back to our very simple animation where we animate only the end property and do that drawing effect. So the first parameter is the start, and this is measured in the whatever time unit we are using. So in this case, seconds. So if I have 0 here, it means 0 seconds. So I'm going to set this to 1. So starting at 1 second, so we can see it working. Then we have the duration. How many seconds do we want the animation for each group to take in time? How long do we want it to be? So I'm going to set this to 2 seconds. And I'm going to leave the interval to half a second, okay? And we also have an easing parameter, which is actually the keyframe interpolation. So we can set it to linear, easy ease in, or easy ease out, which is basically the same parameters that we have here on the keyframe assistance on the animation menu. So again, easy ease in, and easy ease out. If we don't use any of those, it's basically going to default to a linear animation, which is what we are going to use for the first example. So now all we have to do is simply click on Add Keyframes, and our animation is going to be done. So you can see this basically bakes in the keyframes, and it does it in this sort of stair-step like pattern. And you can see start at 1 second, that's this, then duration of 2 seconds, so from 1 second to 3 seconds, the first one, and then the second one, the interval, tells, okay, how much time until the next one begins. So in this case, half a second, again, duration 2 seconds, half a second, 2 seconds, and so on. So this is what these parameters do. So you can see right there, a lot of flexibility. Very easy, very straightforward. Now, let's say we are animating two properties. So let's say I want to animate the opacity as well from 0 to 100. I'm going to bake this again at keyframes. It's going to replace the ones that we had. So you can see now it also animates the opacity. But let's say I changed my mind. I don't like the opacity. So I can go back, simply pressing Ctrl Z and go back to the previous one. Or I'm going to reanimate that opacity. And we also have the remove keyframes option. So right now I'm going to open this so you can see we have keyframes on the opacity and on the end property there. So I can go to remove keyframes. And now this is a little utilitarian that I have included to provide us with maximum flexibility. So we can actually choose to remove only single properties. So we have all of the animatable properties, both from the stroke and the trim properties. And we also have this select and deselect toggle button, or select and deselect all toggle button. And we can also, of course, select and deselect independently. So I'm going to say, okay, I don't want to animate the stroke opacity anymore. So I'm going to select it and say, okay, remove the selected keyframes. It removes them. We close. Oh, but wait a minute. It's all invisible now. That is because you check out the opacity value now. It defaults back to the first, the value of the first keyframe. Now you might be wondering, how do we solve this? It's actually very simple. It just requires a little bit of creativity. So if I want this opacity to be 100% all the way, I simply set the first value to 100, the second one to something else like 0, add the keyframes again using the same parameters on the animation. Now it's sort of backwards. Now I can remove again the opacity, but because the value of the first keyframe is 100%, when I remove it, it stays 100%, okay? So a lot of flexibility right there. So I'm just gonna finish by demonstrating the keyframe interpolation or the easing. So, all right, so let's say now I want to animate the trim backwards, this end property. So I'm gonna go 100% to 0 this time, and I'm gonna keep the opacity the same by feeding it with the two values by setting the from and to values the same. So that's gonna tell him not to animate them. And let's say, okay, I wanna start at 4 seconds this time, so a second after it finishes. And let's say I wanna change the duration to 1, but this time I'm gonna give it an easy ease interpolation. So I can add keyframes and check it out. Now it adds them before the previous one. So it draws it in, and then it draws it out. So there we go. We can animate independently or all of this at the same time. So the script is really designed to provide maximum flexibility to the sorts of animations which, as you might expect, can get very, very complex when we have a lot of these groups that we otherwise would have to animate individually, and changing the parameters after we have animated them would be a nightmare to do manually. So that's why I've designed this sort of complete solution to animate basically almost all of the parameters that we might want to animate regarding vector lines. So that's basically it for the functionality of the Line Animation Toolkit version 1.